Hello, everybody. Sorry, we're having technical difficulties upon technical difficulties this evening. So welcome, everybody. Tonight, we're talking to Issa Amro about his video of a play by Einat Weizman. I think I'm saying that right. I apologize if I'm not. And it's about how to make a revolution. And Issa lives in Hebron, and tonight he's having connection issues with they have very bad infrastructure in Hebron. So if he does go off, then that's why. We shall also be talking to Natalie Strecker, who went to Hebron as a UN representative, and she has been in court with Issa, who has been to court, I think, 4 times. Should we talk to Issa?
Yes, please. I hear you.
Hiya. Well, I'm operating on my phone, so if you see a hand go across, it's because I'm muting myself or whatever. Right, so you have your infrastructure there is terrible, isn't it? And you might have to go offline at any point. So we want to talk about, so get it in quickly as we can, your fantastic, absolutely moving portrayal of one man's rebellion or revolution against apartheid. And could you tell us a little bit about what happened, how you got involved with it, please?
I'm a Palestinian activist from Hebron, and I am resisting the Israeli occupation since long time using non-violence resistance and civil disobedience. The Israeli occupation started targeting me, physically targeting me, emotionally targeting me by, spreading rumors against me, smear campaigns all over. That didn't make me stop my peaceful resistance against the Israeli occupation. That made the occupation arrest me, detain me, and harass me. Then they took me to court, and last year I was convicted on 6 military charges in the Israeli military court, and I appealed, and I'm waiting the appeal results. My work against the occupation is to resist peacefully, to do advocacy in the international community, to talk about the Israeli apartheid and separation and segregation. So Israeli occupation doesn't want us to talk, and they don't want to have any voices against the occupation. So they work hard to stop us. They want to suppress our voices and make our life harder and harder by targeting us physically and arresting us. So my court hearing was observed by many human rights defenders, and usually the military court conviction rate is more than 99.
Oh, we're losing you, Issa. We lost you at 99. Could we bring in Nat? Hi, Nat.
Hey, Lizzie,
Hey.
Good evening. Hey, how are you? We're always fighting technology, aren't we? And especially, obviously, those in the occupied territories suffering under Israeli apartheid. Although it looks like, are you back, Issa? No, he's disappeared. So yeah, what Issa was talking about was the conviction rate in the Israeli military court, which is 99.74%. That's the reality. So at the moment that you are arrested under suspicion of anything, or whether there's any question, whether there's evidence, it doesn't matter. It's totally irrelevant. Basically, you're convicted. So I think that's what Issa was going to talk about. But it looks like Issa might be back. So it'd be better to pass over to him to perhaps talk a little bit about that. Do you want to give me the thumbs up, Issa, if you're able to? I don't know if Issa can hear us. You're muted. I'm going to mute myself. Sorry, Lizzie. I know this is... we don't have the same budget as mainstream media. Oh, he's disappeared again, actually. So, oh no, he's back. Hang on. Right, I'm going to pass you to Issa.
Yes.
Hello.
So, yes, okay. So Israel tries to stop our resistance and oppress our voices not to reach the international community using the military system. In the military system, Palestinians are not allowed to their free speech. We are not allowed to use non-violence resistance, and we are not allowed even to talk or complain about the human rights violations. That is the military system. I wanted me and Einat to raise that to the international community, talk to the international audience and tell them about the military system and the military court and the connection between the military court and the military system. The military court is one of the tools of the Israeli military system. And the military court is not a normal court. It's not a fair trial. It's an occupation, apartheid tool to suppress the Palestinian people. This is what we are talking about. And the play is about the Palestinian Authority oppression against the Palestinian people, how the Israeli occupation used the Palestinian Authority to suppress the Palestinians and to shut off their voices. So we as Palestinians, we are stuck between the Israeli occupation and the subcontractor of the Israeli occupation, the Palestinian Authority.
Wow. And it's off a military court that you were taken to. And I know that Nat has gone with you and observed at that court a few times. And so the play was written by Einat, and but you play a huge part in it. When you come on, it's just so absolutely brilliant an idea of how to express. It's, you know, it's just, you'd laugh, really. You'd laugh at how you're treated, because surely it's comical. How could anyone treat you like that? But that's actually happening.
Yes, it's actually happening to Palestinian kids, to Palestinian women, to Palestinian families. You know, this court made the whole Palestinian society as prisoners and as people who are harassed or mistreated by the military system or the military court. So it's not only me, it's the majority of the Palestinian people facing this court to make them coexist with the occupation and give up their rights and not to work to achieve freedom, justice, and equality. This court is against the international court. It's against our rights as Palestinians. So we want to say to everybody on earth that we want you to be with us to stop the Israeli occupation and to stop the Israeli apartheid. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem announced that Israel is an apartheid state. It's an apartheid state. I'm not equal with the Israeli settlers who are living in the same area as me. There is two sets of law in the same area. One law for the settlers and one law against me as a Palestinian who is living under the Israeli occupation. It's an apartheid regime. We all should stop it and end this regime until Palestinians become equal as everybody on earth. This is what we are calling for as Palestinians. We are calling for freedom, justice, and equality, and we want protection from the international community as human rights defenders.
Well, first of all, the Irish Parliament won a motion to state that Israel was an apartheid endeavour or an apartheid state. Then the British Labour Party passed a motion at conference in September last year, September last year, to state that Israel was apartheid. And now we have the Amnesty report stating that Israel is operating in an apartheid state. So what would you say about, we've had so many problems with Amnesty's report. So what do you know of Amnesty's report?
The report is, telling the truth. It's fact-based report. I want everybody on earth to come to Palestine and see the real situation on the ground. We as Palestinians are stateless. We don't have basic human rights. We don't have free speech. We don't have free movement. We don't have electricity. This infrastructure in Hebron of internet and electricity and water is because of the Israeli apartheid system. The Israeli settlers, they have high technology. They have extra water. They have extra electricity. And we as Palestinians living under the Israeli occupation, we have almost nothing. Not because we are not qualified to have, no, because the Israeli occupation controls everything on our land, controls even our curriculum, controls our importing, exporting our goods, and we are not allowed to produce. They want us to stay dependent on the Israeli occupation. They want us to stay begging for international aid, which we don't want as Palestinians. We want to use our qualification to be, to participate in production and to be as everybody on earth, to build our own society, to build our own country, to build our own civil society. But Israeli occupation is not allowing you in Ireland to have a free speech about if it's apartheid or not. How come I am living under the Israeli military law and the Israeli settler who's living few meters from my house is under the Israeli civil law? When you have two sets of law in the same area, what is that? Equality, it's an apartheid. When the Israeli settlers, they have 10 times more water than me. What is that? Equality? It's not equality, it's apartheid. So Amnesty described what is Palestinians suffering from. And we want people, lawyers, to come out and discuss Amnesty International report, not to have it as a political critics or emotional critics. Israel is an apartheid state because of its violation to the international law and because of its violation of the Palestinian basic human rights. That is the reality. It's not opinion. It's a legal decision and a legal analysis, and it's a legal, it's a result of an illegal research on the ground, and it was investigated by many lawyers and independent lawyers. So it's not my opinion. It's the opinion of Human Rights Watch, which is an American human rights organization, Amnesty International, which is an international organization but based in UK, and Israeli B'Tselem human rights organization. So if Israeli, American, United Kingdom, European human rights organization describe Israel as an apartheid state, someone will tell me it's not an apartheid.
Well, yes. Thank you for that. Well, in the UK, we have always been taught that that the Israel needed to be approved during the Second World War. So if you went back before the Second World War, you would, if you could visit Palestine at that time, you would see a state, a country that had brilliant infrastructure. We've seen the garden cellar of I can't remember where he was now. I think it was in Gaza. The guy that had the garden center, and after it was bombed out, he and his son still grew their plants and just gave them away. And if this happened in our country, in England, it would be, we would all be up in arms. We would all be, absolutely furious at what is happening to ordinary people. And you are just ordinary people, aren't you? So how did you get involved with this play? Did you decide that it would be a good opportunity to tell everybody what was happening?
I promised myself and I promised my people to continue resisting the occupation in spite all difficulties and obstacles, and I'm ready to pay the price of my resistance. And the play is a non-violence tool to expose the Israeli apartheid system, to expose the Israeli military system, to expose the Israeli human rights violations against the Palestinian people. We will continue fighting and fighting and fighting till we get our freedom. We will not give up, but we need the people in the world to stand with us, to stand with our cause according to the international law and according to their principles and according to their morals. This is what we are asking the people to do. We don't want the people to be biased with us or to be biased against us. We want the people to act according to the international law, according to their principles, and according to that morals. That's what we are asking as Palestinian people who are dreaming to have equality and to have justice and to have freedom and self-determination. We are people who are really human beings, who are really, normal human beings, want to live as everybody on earth, and we don't see ourselves better than anyone else, and we see that we are equal with everybody all over the world. This is what we want. We want to be part of the international community with full political and human rights, political and civil human rights, civic human rights.
You have travelled across the world to America, to the UK, to many other countries, I believe, telling people and speaking out about this. And now we find that the Amnesty report, I won't mention your play in particular, but the Amnesty report itself has met with some trouble in Germany. Do you know anything about this?
I know that Amnesty report will get problems all over. There is no change without a price. It's normal. It's normal reaction from many countries. But we, the people who believe in human rights and believe in political rights and believe in the international law, we should stand firm on the fact-based reports from Amnesty, from Human Rights Watch, and from B'Tselem. This is the time to speak loud against the Israeli apartheid, and without calling Israel as an apartheid state, nothing will change.
Yes, absolutely. How much do you think that the Israel apartheid state is akin to the African apartheid state? Do you think that you might succeed quicker than Africa managed to?
We, the Palestinians, learned a lot from the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. We thank all the South African activists who supported our freedom and who are, supporting our peaceful struggle against the Israeli occupation. We think that the Israeli apartheid system is worse than the South African apartheid regime, and a lot of the martial laws used in South Africa are used in Palestine, and the Israeli occupation learned a lot from the apartheid regime in South Africa, and they are using the same laws, especially the administrative detention, the collective punishment, the military system. A lot of its part was imported from the colonial, the British colonies from the past. So it was imported from there, and we as Palestinians, we learned a lot. We work in partnership with South Africans and many other freedom activists all over the world.
Thank you. And can we bring in Nat now? Can you say about the problems that the Amnesty report has met in Germany from a point of view of an inhabitant of Jersey? So you might have a different perspective to me.
First of all, I just want to clarify something, Lizzie, just so people don't get confused. I didn't go with the UN. I worked alongside the UN. So I was actually a human rights monitor with EAPPI, which people can look up. But I worked alongside UN representatives and actually other representatives from other human rights groups and, the EU and stuff like that work there. That's one of the, we had like regular meetings. So I just want to sort of clarify that. Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, in terms of what's happening in Germany, it's interesting because you've had, obviously, Resist had Ronnie Barkin, a friend of mine, an Israeli dissident, on just a sort of couple of weeks ago. And he always said to me that, because that's why he moved to Berlin, was because of Germany's response, to Israeli apartheid. And he said it's the last bastion of Zionism. It's the last place where there is no space to even question it. And obviously, there's a lot of reason for this. Unfortunately, as Ali Abunimar said of Electronic Intifada, Palestinians are paying the price of Germans' guilty conscience for, for their obviously history of, attempting to exterminate the Jewish population and, European population, obviously, along with the Roma, Gypsy and Sinti communities.
What strikes me about that is that the amount of people, Jewish people who were fleeing from Germany and those countries at that time, the country of Israel, let's call the Zionists, would not help them if they went to any other country.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what, if you look into the history, I can't remember the name of it now. I think it's a Havara agreement. I'm not very good at remembering names at the best of times. But yeah, if you look into that, we know that a lot of the rhetoric around the sort of the Zionist movement at that time was that, well, if some Jewish, some European Jews need to die so that we get our state, then that's fine,
Yeah.
So and I think this is really important for people to learn the history, that the Zionism to exist needs anti-Semitism, and that's the uncomfortable truth, which is horrendous because when you consider it in that context, it makes Zionism, explicitly anti-Semitic. And that's where you get this ethnic supremacy and all the rest of it. And sort of going on to what Issa was saying about South African apartheid, which I think, if I'm correct, started actually at a very similar time to Israeli apartheid. But it's quite right that they used, the same measures. And actually Desmond Tutu said, I think it was Desmond Tutu that said, obviously, what he witnessed of Palestinian suffering is even worse than what, the Black South African community were facing during their apartheid.
Yeah, Nelson Mandela would always say, without the freedom of the Palestinians, we have no freedom.
Absolutely. And I think that's true. If we're not, unless all of us are free, we're not free. But it's important to actually bear in mind that Israel continued to arm and support South African apartheid right up to the end. So sort of returning to the amnesty situation in Germany. So what happened was they had posted the report, and then immediately, they must have had, I don't know, a phone call, but for whatever reason, they immediately took it off their website. They are, if you go and you search for it, you will find a link and it will take you to the international site, which is really interesting. But I think it's important to read. This is an article that a 972 mag, which are really good if you're looking at the situation. But this is what the German Amnesty written when they talked about obviously the reports, which basically they've been silent on. It said the systematic extermination of Jewish people was planned and implemented in Germany. Anti-Semitism in Germany, violence, attacks, property damage, and conspiracy ideologies is still present and at a disturbing high, which is true. This places a special responsibility upon the German section of Amnesty. In a current and historical national context, an objective fact-based debate on the classification made by the report is difficult. To counteract the danger of instrumentalization or misinterpretation of the report, the German section of Amnesty will not plan or carry out any activities in relation to this report. And that's deeply concerning because actually, if we consider what they're actually saying, they're actually implicitly, not implicitly, I'd say explicitly, connecting the Jewish people to Israel, which in itself is anti-Semitic and actually in violation of the IHRA. But if you look, it says that they can't have a fact-based debate on it. Well, as Issa was talking about before, this report isn't just people's opinions. This report is well evidenced. It's followed a legal structure, just like other reports have. And it really is quite infuriating when we have a situation where Palestinians have been saying for how many years that they're suffering under apartheid, but the West won't accept this until, basically white Europeans write a report that confirm this. Obviously you had Israeli human rights groups who were actually the first to sort of, state that Israel was guilty of crime of apartheid with B'Tselem and Yesh Din. And then Obviously, last year we had Human Rights Watch. I think it was last year. And then obviously most recently Amnesty, which is huge. It's a significant moment when Amnesty's released its report. But its report is based on, scientific provable evidence. It's not, and what is interesting as well in terms of looking at the report, they don't just deal with 67 or anything. They go right back to the roots of when Israel was constructed. And I think it's very true. All the evidence demonstrates that. If you look at the rhetoric of Ben-Gurion before, Israel, modern day Israel was created, it was very clear what their intention was. And actually, if you go back to Theodor Herzl, that, the movement, in the 19th century. And I think that when you sort of recognize that fact, that is significant, that they've acknowledged that Israel, as some of us have said, and you've heard me say this many times, that Israel, is a racist endeavor and was from its inception, because the proof was always there. It was built on the backs of, of massacres, broken bodies, and the erasure, total razing of over 500 villages.
What do you think about the fact that it scares me that the influence that Israel has over all of our governments, all of our politics, all of our, even down to small little things like the complete destruction of Jeremy Corbyn and the whole socialist project in Britain, the fact that that someone has managed to shut Germany down from on an Amnesty report. They've almost managed to silence Amnesty, and I know people are fighting back, but does it scare you, the reach that they have?
I think what I would say is the reason why Israel, and it's important to kind of get, sort of look at this in a balanced way. The reason why Israel gets to do what it does is because of America. If America decided that Israel was no longer its ally for whatever reasons, that political expedient, to do so, they would drop Israel like a ton of bricks. So this is about, the influence comes from the fact that they are backed, literally funded and armed by America. So of course it's concerning when we have situations when, obviously, I did my presentation. Gaz kindly helped me record my presentation from the the Festival of Resistance. And it's one of the things that I talk about, is why are they able to get away with this? And yes, it is undermining our democracy. It's absolutely terrifying. But the reason why is because, you have special interest groups are aligned with the wider interests of the ruling classes, and certainly the West, to maintain that hegemony, to maintain control of resources, to have a presence, in the Middle East, when you think about oil and all the rest of it, and because of where it exists, in terms of geographically. So I think that this is where all these things meet. So I think that the reason why they get away with what they're doing is because of all those things aligning with this wider desire by, the 1%, but particularly, the Western 1%, although I don't know if it'd be any different if, if Russia and China were more in control. I don't know. I doubt it. But I think that, because it aligns with that, that's how they're able to have so much influence. If you look at Jeremy Corbyn, obviously they used a number of things. They tried to say he was a terrorist, an IRA sympathizer, and all these other things. But the thing that stuck was anti-Semitism. And part of it is because of European guilt. Part of it is because the lobby is very strong. And the reason why the lobby is very strong is because we know that you don't have to be Jewish to be Zionist. And we also know that a lot of Zionists, don't identify, a lot of Jews don't identify as Zionist, and actually some would be, see it as offensive and are actually, strongly anti-Zionist. But you have so if you look at America, for instance, you have the evangelical churches who have a huge amount of weight and influence and a lot of money. So they're able to obviously support that sort of movement. And I think you have similar in the UK, not to the same extent as America, but we know basically where, you know, our government is the US's lapdog. We do whatever it is that, you know, our government does whatever it is that they want us to do. And I think a lot of it comes down to that. So I am frightened, but I think it's important to recognize all the other things that it's connected to. So although it is about Israel in this context, it's not explicit, you know, it's not exclusively rather about Israel, but rather a general maintenance of the status quo. Sorry, I went off a little bit there, but hopefully you got the point.
Yes, well, the thing is that so many people will be propagandized by the mainstream media, and I think that I was absolutely moved by Issa's play, or Einat's play, which, you know, just the way that it brought across the absolute lunacy of this offer court, military court. So is Issa still there? Are you still there, Issa?
Yeah,
Right.
I
Okay,
I think poor Issa was doing so well, struggling with his not feeling very well in his voice, and also having to deal with the infrastructure, you know, the failure of infrastructure because of apartheid. If
you are able to listen, Issa, we thank you so much for all your input. You know, I met you at the Resist event in Brighton last year, and you know what you said was just so inspiring. And you know, people are just ordinary people, and they're being subjugated and persecuted, murdered, and you know, locked up for absolutely no reason, and they have absolutely no defense against it. Issa was able to come over to London to help with the recording of that play.
Yeah.
And you also managed to come over from Jersey to London to help or to take part in the play in some way. So can you tell us about you know, what it hoped to achieve? And everybody knows the link is in the YouTube blurb, and you know, please watch it and share it. It's absolutely moving. So,
yeah, no, it's a fantastic play, and I would I mean, obviously I was tasked with being the fundraiser and also promotion, and also I sort of gave some kind of support, and that's why I was there for the filming, which was amazing and such a privilege to be part of that. And I think, I mean, the intention obviously was to show an aspect of apartheid, which is, you know, watching the Palestinians having to go through the sham court, the kangaroo court that is the Israeli military court. So it just shows you one aspect of how apartheid translates into reality for Palestinians. You know, I mean, looking at, you know, obviously it focused on the case of Issa, but he was talking about all the different groups that go into, you know, that end up having to suffer in the way that he did. You know, he talked about women, but also children. And something that's really important to understand is that Israel is the only state in the world that systematically incarcerates children. You know, there's the No Way to Treat a Child campaign. If you look at Defence for Children International Palestine, you'll see lots of reports about what happens to children, and quite often I speak about that if you look at it in the context of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which obviously Israel ratified, and yet says it doesn't apply to Palestinians, which is, you know, racist in itself. But in that, in terms of the intention of the play, which, by the way, I did speak to her. She wasn't obviously able to join us this evening. She says that she's hoping this isn't the end of it. It's part of a wider project. So she does want to stage the play in theatres in the UK. And what she hopes to do is build upon it. So this one focused on the case of obviously Issa, and there's lots of stuff I would encourage people to look up if they want to know what Issa, you know, what Issa had to face, and the sham, you know, court, the trial, and the rest of it. Obviously, watch the play. It's fantastic because it includes real documentation from that trial. But there's lots of resources you can find online, and actually Amnesty, obviously Issa was the subject of an Amnesty campaign, and I wrote an article on Medium about what was happening with Issa. And I went to Off the Court. I went twice, actually. I went the first time I went with a military court watch, which was just horrendous. I mean, you turn up at the military court, and it's like you expect when you're going into a court that it will be, I suppose, like an imposing building that's very smart and wooden. That's how I imagine courts to be. But when you turn up off a military court, you know, aside from all the indignities that Palestinians face having to go through into it, and they're not allowed to take any food or drink, and they can be waiting for hours, you're literally talking about porter cabins. They're just sheds, you know, really. And you go in, and like the first time I went in, I actually had to leave halfway through for a little bit because I got into such a state, because it was so demeaning, and it was just horrendous. I can't even really articulate what it was like to witness you know, the trial and what would happen. All shackled, wearing like these brown sort of outfits, like trousers and tops. Their families, if they've been able to make it, are sitting at the back. And you had this situation where, you know, the judge who's got his feet crossed up on, and bearing in mind the judge is also a military officer, has got his feet crossed up on the desk. You have, like, you know, if they're lucky enough to have a lawyer, the lawyers obviously sort of maybe gets to speak a little bit, and then, you know, a lot of the time there isn't a translator, so the lawyer's trying to explain to the Palestinians who are on trial what it is that's happening at that point in time.
Yeah,
and then they're shouting over each other.
And can we just mention that the fact that there are 2 different languages used?
Yeah. So yeah, so they, and that's the thing, is even in the whole process, you know, often, especially like if you look at Palestinian child prisoners, but that's true of any group, but they're forced to sign confessions in a language that they don't understand, and the trial takes place in Hebrew, which of course is most Palestinians do not speak. You know, they might do if they're, you know, a citizen of Israel, but they don't, certainly in general, don't speak
They
Hebrew.
speak Arabic.
Yeah, they speak Arabic, you know, sorry, not Palestinian. But yeah, and I think, I mean, when I was there, one of the horrendous things was one of the individuals whose case got adjourned, although he wasn't allowed to, you know, they're still held in custody. One of the witnesses that was called, whose testimony was being used, it turns out wasn't even in the village at the time where he was apparently accused of having thrown 3 stones. And he wasn't even in the village at the time. And this is the nonsense that takes place. When I went back to see, obviously I went back a couple of weeks later with Issa to support Issa at Offer again. I mean, it was slightly different in that, because obviously Issa is pretty high profile as an activist. He's well known and well respected. He's obviously the only UN formally recognized human rights defender in Palestine, and he was lucky enough to have a good lawyer. So he had Gabi Lasky, who's amazing, and he had diplomats. So it was slightly better in terms of people weren't shouting as much, but it continued to be exactly the same. You know, if you watch the play, it'll actually show the footage from the, you know, of the events that the trial refers to. And the footage shows that what they're saying is total nonsense. It's just lies.
Well, did we have a clip, Gaz? Okay.
Yeah.
But so we don't have a clip of it, but it's just now I can see Gaz's thing, but not Nat. Nat, if you want to say something so that you come back on screen. Oh, yeah, no,
I'm still here. Hopefully you can.
There we go.
See me.
There we go. Yes, so sorry everybody who's watching about the technical difficulties that we're having, but I suspect that we're having we never have any technical difficulties until we're talking on this subject. How strange is that? You know,
unfortunately, we don't have the funding. You see, our technology would be fantastic if we were funded by the 1% and doing their bidding. This is what happens. But we're proper grassroots. This is how we build our resilience, Lizzie. And I think it's important as well for viewers to bear that in mind.
Well, it's very nice of you to think that there is no one playing behind the scenes at making sure that we have technical difficulties, Nat. You know, it's nice of you to be so kind in your thoughts. So what was so emotive for me about the play was that this was one man's story. And yes, perhaps it would have been even more emotive if it was a woman's story or a child's story, but regardless of whose story it was one person's story. And if everybody who watches this play can imagine if they had to go into court in the UK, how they would be treated, how they would be facilitated, they would be provided with a lawyer, they would be made aware of their rights, they would be made aware of the charges against them, they would be able to refute those charges, they would be able to plead guilty or not guilty, and they would be able to, I know it's very difficult, actually, you almost have to prove your innocence now rather than the opposition trying to prove you're guilty. But even so, can you imagine as going into a court in the UK and you being treated like that?
Yeah, it's really difficult to make sense of, and I think that's the thing I found so upsetting. Like I said, I needed to leave. I mean, obviously our court system, although saying that if the Tories and, you know, red Tories have their way, then we will be in a very similar situation possibly, where we'll, you know, because the court system is supposed to be set up where the burden of proof is actually with the prosecutor, you know, that they have to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. But that's not the situation where you're guilty until proven innocent, which is the situation that you have obviously in the Palestinian, for Palestinians in the Israeli military court, where you're guilty. I mean, you know, the fact that obviously Issa wasn't convicted of all of the charges, it was 6 of the 18, and the fact that that was the case and he wasn't convicted for all 18 is incredible, you know. Which just demonstrates, and part of that I would say is because, you know, when Issa was saying we keep fighting, we keep using our voices, you know, we make the apartheid, you know, pay the occupation, it come with a cost. And I think a lot of that is because we really campaigned hard. I think that you took part, I know you did, in the Twitter storms we had, and we got it trending. And we know that influenced the outcome to some degree, because it was highlighted in the trial itself, is that they were aware of this Twitter storm, which I suppose sometimes when we watch stuff and feel like there's nothing that we can do, we feel powerless. But, you know, little things like that prove that isn't the case. We've just got to keep, you know, show that that endurance, really. And
thank you for introducing the last quarter of what I wanted to speak about. I apologize first of all to the audience. Neither Nat nor I or Gaz, our producer, have access to the chats, so I'm afraid your questions will go unanswered, and we really apologize for that. But we want to tell you what you can do. Keep speaking up. Yes, they're going to throw you out of the Labour Party. Sorry. But is that any great loss at the moment? No. So wear it as a badge of pride, in fact. Take part in Twitter storms and keep sharing the videos, the appalling treatment. A child trying to go to school. His school is only 500 yards away, but he has to pass through 3 military checkpoints. How sad is it that our children would not recognize a soldier, but children in Palestine know exactly what a soldier looks like, and they know to be very scared indeed if one comes up to them, because you know, it's not going to be good. So what else can we do? You can write to your MPs, email your MPs, because even though they may not respond, especially if they're red Tories or blue Tories, they probably won't respond at all to you, but they have a legal obligation to note that you, a constituent, have corresponded with them. So if enough of us do it, regardless of the fact that we don't hear and we're belittled or ignored, first of all, what's the saying? First you're ignored, then you
laughed at,
yeah, then you're laughed at,
and then you win.
Then you win. So what about going to Palestine? I noted Issa said that, please come. So how easy is it to get a visa? How easy is it to visit? Is there a way to visit on a holiday trip? You know, I mean, ordinarily we go to the South France or Spain, wherever, Jersey, and we would make our arrangements to stay at a hotel, or we would book a complete package. How can you do that? Can you do that? And what does it cost? Do you know these things?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, absolutely. And like Issa said, and it's something I said when I came back. Obviously, I've been a couple of times, but the second time as a human rights monitor. So I was obviously there living in the community. But I can't stress enough how important it is to go and visit if you can, if you have the circumstances. We know that isn't true of everybody. And it doesn't mean that you can't support and can't be very aware of what's happening unless you go, because actually the great thing about social media now is we do get to learn all these things. That's what technology, when it works well, that's what, you know, we can find out about stuff, and actually often when it's happening. So I would encourage people to visit. You can, in fact, EasyJet do flights to Israel, so you can go. We've got two options really, either via Ben Gurion, which means you go obviously into Israel. I mean, either way, you've got to go through Israeli security. Otherwise, you can go to Jordan and then go over the Allenby Bridge. So there are two ways, but EasyJet do good flights. And what I would say is there's lots of really good tours that you can go with. So there's Green Olive tours. And I would say to people, if you're looking at going, by all means, you can always contact me or Issa. A lot of you should know, obviously, I'm on Twitter. You can just look me up, Natalie Strecker. I think my handle is at Natalie Streck, STRECKE. I think it is one or something like that. So I'm very happy for people to ask me, but you do have Green Olive tours. There are others that you can go with. There are different tours that you can do. Youth Against Settlements is always happy to accommodate people there. You need to remember that when you are going to such places like that, you're talking about basics, you know, don't think you're going into some, you know, 5-star resort, because that's not going to be the case.
All you can eat buffet.
Absolutely, you know, but that's the nature of apartheid, isn't it? You know, this is the thing. But there's some fantastic, like in Ramallah, there is Area D hostel, which is amazing. There is in fact Ramallah, I think it's called Ramallah Hostel, but there's I think it's H1 or H2 hostel in Hebron, where you can stay, and there's lots of ways that you can do it. And actually, do you know what? There's a really good series you can watch, and there's a focus on one of their episodes on Palestine, and it's called DIY Destinations. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a Korean guy. And he goes to Palestine, because I remember it was Miko Peled that said, oh, you need to watch this. So I did. And I was like, oh, that's my friend. And I went there and stuff. But he gives some really good advice on how to travel to in the Palestinian territories on a budget, and how to do it ethically as well. And I think that's the most important thing, is to be very mindful when you go, because I've had associates over here who have gone since I went and basically didn't speak to me before they went. And unfortunately, they made decisions that meant they were putting money into Israeli apartheid. And I know that that wouldn't have been a deliberate decision, but I think that you need to be really savvy about this. So if you're going there, it's important to do it in such a way that you're not helping to perpetuate apartheid, and rather to support the Palestinians. And what I would also say, just some travel tips, absolutely support the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, who are having a horrendous time, obviously, at this moment. But also keep some money for when you get to Hebron, because a lot of people forget that. And I would say, please, please, please go to Hebron, because I think it's one of the within the occupied Palestinian territories, if we sort of not consider Gaza, because that's a lot harder obviously to get into, but it's where you can see very clearly in a matter of seconds the apartheid nature of Israel. I think it's a microcosm of the whole situation there. But actually also stuff's a lot cheaper there. So I'd say spread out your money, support the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, definitely spend some money in, Bethlehem, where the Palestinian Christians are that quite often get forgotten, and make sure you save some money for when you get to Hebron. And also it stops people from telling you off. I used to get told off when people used to turn up with no money and they'd be asking me why they didn't have any money to buy their stuff. And I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Are you risking your life?
No. This is where we can use our European privilege, in a very positive way. The reality is, if you look at the number of Europeans that have been killed, over the years, I think it's 3 that I can think of, Rachel Corrie, Tom Hernzel, of course, and Vic, and I can't remember his name, the Italian guy, and that obviously that wasn't by Israel. So I would say it's very, very safe, because Israelis know it's still not in their interest to start killing settlers. You have to be careful of, because they don't care.
Well, this is it. This is what we see. I saw a video a few weeks ago, perhaps a month ago, of Israeli young people. They were almost children, and they were swearing and shouting death to the Arabs, and we will kill you all, and you are worse than scum. And they were very threatening, very aggressive. And I was wondering, I wouldn't like, because it would be clear that I was going to visit Palestine, and it would be clear what I thought of Israel apartheid. So would they attack me for that? And would I not be able to reach certain places? Obviously, I wouldn't be able to reach Gaza, because of the nature of the Israel apartheid state.
And the blockade. Yeah. I would say to you, first of all, don't go in, and this is really important. If you're going to fly, into Ben Gurion, and actually doesn't matter if you're going to go through Israeli security, then obviously, one, you need to be looking at your social media posting, because they will look you up. So just be smart, about preparing. You don't go in saying I'm going into the West Bank, because they'll just deport you. So it's really important to do that. So, have some plans. I would organize to stay an overnight somewhere that's not going to be questioned in Tel Aviv, and then go down to Jerusalem, and that's where you can sort of access the West Bank. But no, you can get to the sites fine. I think what I would say is when there's lots of settlers around, because the settlers are where are the ones you really need to be careful of, because they don't care whether, if they think you're there supporting Palestinians, but there are always soldiers around, and the soldiers aren't going to let a settler kill you. The only time where you see people getting injured, and that happens a lot, is when people are giving protective presents, like the olive harvest and stuff like that. That's when you'll see where settlers succeed in attacking individuals, including lots of Israelis, because we know obviously a lot of Israelis go in and support the Palestinians as well, and we shouldn't forget them in this struggle. So I think that it's important to keep that in mind. But no, you'll be absolutely fine. It's different. Myself and all of my team got physically attacked in Hebron, by Annette Cohen, who you can find YouTube videos of, and also of Hannah. I can't remember his name. Just Offa. That's it. Offa Hannah, I think his surname is. He was just vile. Real bully. He wasn't as aggressive to us in the same way. He sort of physically pushed and knocked the phone out my hand and stuff like that. I've got video footage of that when I did my podcast with Eddie. But he wouldn't attack you in the same way that he would a Palestinian, where he's beating them to a pulp, supported by soldiers. So I think that you will be absolutely fine. You might see some stuff which is difficult, but this is the reality of apartheid, and we need to come to terms with what that means, because from that you find your fight and your anger and that need to struggle, you know, when you're saying what are the things that we can do. Well, let's have a look at some of the wins, you know, obviously BDS and the rest of it, and we can write to MPs, but don't rely on them. Let's have a look at direct action. I mean, look at Palestine Action. They managed to get Oldham, you know, the Elbit in Oldham to shut down, you know. We need to look at our history and look at the history of different movements and realize there's lots of power that we have. We've just got to remember that we have it, and we've got to find the courage. And like I often say, we don't surrender to Israeli apartheid. We don't cower to them. We don't take on board, you know, the accusations they make about anti-Semitism. Just ignore it, forget it. It's got nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Just get back to the thing. This is about demanding the implementation of international law. That's what we're demanding, is for the Palestinians to be, you know, free, equal, and to have justice. There is nothing racist about that. Anyone suggesting there is are inherently racist themselves. So it is about finding our courage and recognizing, like I always say, yes, labels hurt. Yes, they're not very nice, but let's get a bit of perspective, you know, go Palestine, see what's happening, and then maybe it will help you with that perspective.
Yeah. Right, but I don't know. Can you see if we got Issa back or?
No, he's still not there, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised. He was having problems beforehand, and he is very limited in his infrastructure, in the technical stuff. Much as we're just living it large, really, aren't we? You know, we think, oh God, the laptop won't connect to StreamYard, but actually we've got internet, we've got electricity, we've got food, we've got water, so we are 185% better off than anyone living in the occupied territories. So watch the play, watch the video, share it with everybody you know, write to your MP, email your MP, talk to everybody, go and visit Palestine if you're able to. I'm not sure that it's a family holiday destination. Don't, perhaps if you've got children, then perhaps you can't contribute in that way. Shut Elbit down. Shout out about all the Israeli development and whatever, Saudi Arabia, whoever they're selling the weapons to. All weapons manufacturers must be closed down in the UK, and we can do it, and communities can do it. What else, Nat?
Well, like I said, BDS, I know we're running out of time. So yeah, BDS and actually, you know what? You know, just keep using our voices and also our buying power. So don't buy anything that we know, like Caterpillar. And, you know, when you look at the stuff like that, there's lots of things that we can do. But I would say we don't give in. We demonstrate our summit. And actually, do you know who's been fantastic in responding to the accusations of anti-Semitism is actually the General Secretary of Amnesty, Agnes Kalamard. Absolutely amazing. She has held her ground, you know, and even when she's been threatened by the US, who are condemning the report and threatening sort of legal stuff, she's going, I dare you, you take us, take us to, you know, let's look at this through the legal framework, you know. And that's what we do.
Everybody who's on Twitter, on Instagram, follow these people. Sorry, we've run out of time. And from Issa, thank you so much. And from Nat, thank you so much. And from myself and all of us at Resist, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.